We've had a stellar presentations last night, and I've already purchased my tape. I hope some of you will do that. I noticed they've been walking around, and maybe the $20 is an issue, but I think you're not going to find something any better than to keep in your archives than that presentation last night. What I would like to do is, we have an excellent panel, so I'm not going to do too much talking here, but I want to say a couple of things to tie in between last night, this morning, and where we're going this afternoon. One of the things that Prime Minister Gonzalez talked about, and again we heard it in the panel this morning, is we tend to talk about the Caribbean, we tend to talk about Africa, and not understanding that there are diversity and a lot of differences even in these areas. The Caribbean, you know, there's Suriname, and we actually have a representative that was born and raised in Suriname here, which speaks Dutch. We'll be here from Joe Baptiste, who hails from Haiti, and there's several other places in the Caribbean, Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Saint Martin, and as people know, Saint Martin, French. And then when you do the extension of the Caribbean, people like Esmeralda and Waldemar will, talk about Panama, and we heard last night about the Dominican Republic that shares the island of Hispaniola with Haiti. So it is a diverse place. So one of the things we ought to keep in mind, and several, as we go through these presentations, is that the Caribbean, and even I think Mel Foote talked about the 7 types of black people. He mentioned African Americans that came into slave, and the Caribbeans and the sons of Caribbeans, that the Caribbean is a diverse place with a lot of different languages. There's this lady next to me, and we work very closely on the 2010 census, where we're trying to get people to identify themselves on the census form as where they're from. And we were confronted by some black Americans who were concerned that we would be diluting the issue of the black count. And we said, no, we're gonna check black, and then we'll put in Jamaica or thing. And then a couple of friends came up to me and said, Hulbert, but Trinidad is about 50% Indo, not black, and 50%, and the same thing in Guyana. So there is, we need to keep some of those things in mind, because the second point I think I would like to make, and just again picking up from President Pierce's presentation this morning, he mentioned about 8 or 9 points, if you recall, and couple, obviously it's not a big issue in the Caribbean, peace and security and the rule of law, because the Caribbean folks pride themselves on democratic government. But they talked about the issue of land, big issue in all of the different parts of the Caribbean. Intra-African trade is what President Pierce mentioned, and the Caribbean has been trying to deal with something called CSME, Caribbean Single Market Economy. The whole issue of education. Roz Prudhomme, who's probably next to Ron, primarily responsible for a lot of the stuff that's going on here in the last day and a half, is from Barbados. And if you talk to a Bajan, they'll tell you, we're the #1 in the world when it comes to education, and very proud of their education system. And the 3 universities in the West Indies, the one in Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad. So there's a lot of those kind of things. But quickly to move on, the Gonzalez, some of you know last night, and most of the people were here last night, right, because I think I recognize it, talked about the airport that he's building in St. Vincent, and I couldn't help but, smile and go back into a little history for those because again, one of the things that we're celebrating around this time is the situation of Maurice Bishop in Grenada. And I hope that there are people in this room who remember that the Cubans built the Point Saline Airport, and one of the reasons they built it is so it was going to be easier to get jets to go from Cuba to Angola, and we had a whole discussion last night about the role of the Cubans in Angola and MPLA, and how Mandela talked about the fact that it was that victory of the Angolans and the Cubans that helped to liberate and open the keys for him to be freed. So these connections are very interesting. And obviously the Point Saline Airport and all of the reasons why folks decided to invade Grenada, it gets lost to protect supposedly some US medical students. So the Cubans, before they were helping Prime Minister Gonzalez build his airport in St. Vincent, they were working 20, 30 years ago on the airport in Point Celine in Grenada. The other thing that I would just like quickly to mention, and again in the context of the diaspora, and we'll hear more about it in the panel that's going to follow this panel, about time does fly, but I think about 5, 7 years ago, there was a plan to create something called the Fair Trade of America Center. And there were 2 cities that were competing to be the center of what would be where free trade, not fair trade, free trade of America. And it was Port of Spain, Trinidad, and Miami. And there were some meetings in Miami, and everybody assumed Miami was going to get it because, the votes, the people who were voting was essentially the OAS. But suddenly people started doing a numbers count. And 15 CARICOM members all pledged their support to Port of Spain, Trinidad. The Dominican Republic joined CARICOM in pledging their support. Panama, Venezuela, and so before people, could blink, there were enough votes to make Port of Spain, not Miami, the center of the Americas. Well, to make that story in its fullest, at this meeting in Miami where they were trying to organize support in Miami for the Miami, a number of us from the Caribbean went to that meeting and said, no, we support Port of Spain. And it speaks to, and it got a lot of press, and it speaks to one of the roles in a very strategic way, how diaspora folks can make an influence over a much larger issue. They decided not to do Miami or Port of Spain for a lot of other reasons, but the bottom line was that first the countries themselves came together, and then the diaspora in South Florida in solidarity with CARICOM played an integral role, I think, in helping to defeat Miami becoming the center of the trade movement. So having said those 2 things, I've been given, and let me get this out of the way now before I forget, in the age of technology, all of you with these Androids and smartphones, while we've been meeting, we've got a message came in from the U.S. Virgin Islands, where some folks there are familiar with what's going on here and wanted to express their solidarity with us, and I told the person who handed me this note, of course I will read this because I'm from the U.S. Virgin Islands, and I would have to do that. And there's actually been some very interesting movements in the Virgin Islands around the issue of reparation, because as you know, the Virgin Islands was purchased from Denmark in 1917 by the United States, so essentially protect the Panama Canal. And actually the Danish government has been having some conversations with people in the Virgin Islands about reparation. So there's some precedent there in terms of going after the Brits and the French and the Dutch. So this panel, very illustrious group of people, and we're going to go back in history and also bring us right up to date, because there's a lot of stuff going on in Haiti right now. We heard last night about the whole issue of cholera from Prime Minister Gonzalez and some other issues. But clearly the first Black Republic, a place that ought to be up in all of our minds and heads and our consciousness, a place that Ron Daniels has been going to for the last 15 years and has been hauling me there for the last 5 years through the Haitian Support Project. I mean, the importance of Haiti, as Prime Minister Gonzalez said last night, ought to have a special place in all of our hearts and our minds as we do Pan-African work.